official Rosicrucian body, but I know people who are Rosicrucians, and I'm good friends with them. And one year I was booked to give a talk at the World Rosicrucian Society meeting in the Dutch islands off, somewhere in Central America, off the Caribbean. But it was cancelled at the last minute, so I never got to meet them all. It's a shame. Invite me back and I'll come and talk. Other great Rosicrucians, yes, Comenius, or Kamensky, who was a great kind of Polish, Czech, Moravian. The Moravian Brethren were similar to the Rosicrucians, kind of mystical Christians, pacifists. They didn't want to fight in the 30 Years' War. And Comenius was a great teacher. He wanted to inspire people to look to education instead of violence. And he came to Britain, he inspired educators down to this day. He wrote the first textbooks for children with pictures so they could master the alphabet and language and things. Another great Rosicrucian is Michael Mayer, who was active in the Holy Roman Empire, and also in Britain, Robert Flood, who wrote some incredible cosmic books with treatises and so on. And then Elias Ashmole, who was one of the first Freemasons. So we've gone now 100 years forward into the early 1700s, late 1600s. And Ashmole, who gave his name to the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford, where they have Pocahontas's jacket, came from Virginia, Massachusetts, and many other wonderful things. The Ashmolean is worth going to. Anyway, he was interested in the Rosicrucians and believed that they existed. So another chap from that time, Thomas Vaughan, was a brother of a Welsh poet, and he was a experimental scientist and a Rosicrucian who was the secretary of Lord Moray, who was one of the founders of the Royal Society in London, friend of Charles II. So the sciences and the Rosicrucians interlock at that 1600s, 1700s, and also Freemasonry. So you've got these three kind of variables, and I studied this stuff for years. I read all the books, looked at all the source materials. The fact is we don't have enough traces to track it all. You'd need an AI program to work out exactly who was what. I think, but I do think that, it was exciting. And then you've got alchemy as part of that conversation. Now, alchemy is, again, another way of talking about ancient Egyptian Hermeticism. It was coined as a term, or alchemy was invented by Zosimus, who was a 2nd century Egyptian sage who combined in himself the wisdom of ancient Egypt. He knew all about the Kabbalah, he knew all about Christianity, he knew about the books of Enoch. He came before Islam, so he didn't know about that. And he didn't agree with the official church. He said that the official church had been taken over by egomaniacs, and that Constantine himself, murdered his wife and killed his son, and that just being churchified didn't make you ethical. To become truly ethical, you have to go through the alchemical process of dissolution, which is the ego death. And that's what Jung later said in his analysis of Zosimus's work. So Jung is another Rosicrucian, if you want. And there are many others. Saint-Germain, I could talk about. Rudolph II, the great emperor. H. Spencer Lewis in America, who tried to sort of create a Rosicrucian order. A.E. Waite, a great occultist in Britain. MacGregor Mathers, who founded the Rosicrucians. Well, he founded the Golden Dawn in Paris, but he was a Rosicrucian as well. All these are amazing people.
Yeah, but you spoke about the intrication with science.
Yes.
So I guess this is one of maybe the root of revolution in the industrial revolution, in a way. But what about politics?
Okay, so these people I've talked about, they were reformers rather than revolutionaries. They weren't saying, we're Rosicrucians, get out on the street and man the barricades and kill the aristocrats. they were often aristocrats themselves, and some commoners, you know, working with engineers, technical people that are inventing stuff. The Royal Society had a mix of the aristocrat and the kind of the guy making the equipment to test the experiments, right? And it was the same in France that they were doing, and Germany. So they were reformers because what Bacon had said is we have to advance learning so that we can ameliorate the human condition. We can stop suffering, like doctors. We can stop the mass, like plague. You know, in European history, plague, when it comes, it slaughtered millions. So they wanted to advance medicine. And to do that, they had to advance chemistry to get medicine to the point where Fleming and people can invent penicillin or invent antidotes to the plague. So they were pioneer scientists on an ethical mission to improve the human condition. And that is a reforming position. Some people misinterpret it to be a revolutionary position. And they said, and this was the Marxist era, the kind of Leninist thing, only science matters. Let's kill all the religious people, slaughter the priests, kill the Muslims, and then we'll all be scientists. This was a total misunderstanding of the real teaching of Bacon and Co. and Dee, which was to ameliorate the human condition with science, but keep the spiritual side and the ethical side. Bacon said the famous line, he said, a little learning will drive a man to atheism, but a little deeper learning will bring them back to the path of God. You know, so the trouble is some people get off the train early and they leave at the stop called atheism, which is before the train gets to the end, which is, you know, which is where we use science and spirituality and religion and bring them together into a common focus. And I think that was the vision of the Rosicrucians, which lives on. They wanted also a world of peace. You know, I met a chap called Jan van Rickenborough in Britain. Even Walt Disney was a Rosicrucian at one point, with his beautiful films and his cartoons that gave pleasure to the lives of millions of children. He was a Freemason and a Rosicrucian, trying to bring beauty and art and magic to people. I think lots of people in the film industry. A friend of mine in America once gave me a book, which I have here in leather bound, which was the Masonic Lodge of Hollywood. And it's a who's who. And it's old, so I don't know of the current lot, but this was the who's who back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And a lot of these great Hollywood people were Rosicrucians and Freemasons, using art to advance, you know, social happiness. So that, I think, is, and their texts include the Old and New Testaments, the ancient Egyptian mystical theology, the Hermetic writings, occult and esoteric and theological books in all languages, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, the Pharma Fraternitas, which tells, like, there is this brotherhood called the Rosicrucians, and women could join too, by the way, and the Confessio Fraternitas. These are all studied by Rosicrucians to this day. They're very eclectic in their theology. God is God, but also the Holy Spirit. They honour Christ as the beloved exemplar of what it is to be a Rosicrucian. When he was on the cross, he was a rose, you know, a symbol of love. There's probably about 400,000 now living on the planet, but they do good works. So anyway, you can look up the details in my thing, but it's a good topic. Did I answer the question about the politics enough?
Yes, there are two questions I still have, but I just to share with you.
Sure.
One is I heard that the main mistake of the Vatican was to miss the train after the Renaissance period, not to adapt. And I think maybe if the Vatican could have collaborated with Rosicrucian, it could be fantastic.
It's not too late. Yeah, we're hoping
we can pray for that.
I'm still working on that one.
And the second point is about the nowadays crisis of Freemasonry, as we see even with its power among politicians, they are not finding a good way to manage the boat as a captain, for example.
Sure.
And that so maybe there are some. You reveal the good points of Rosicrucian doctrine, maybe, but maybe there are some bad points. As for example, is it respectful for all humanity or only for an elite? Or maybe it gives me will to dig about
Sure,
what
dig away. Yeah. I have a big library you can look at. Those are good questions. I think they are around doing their thing, and I think the ship hasn't gone down completely yet. So they are sort of managing-ish, and there are great people doing great work. I think there are some anti-forces. I'd say Putin has worked with Russian fascism to strike a bolt at the heart of that project. You see, and this goes back to Lenin and Stalin's ignorance. It's an ignorant position to hold. It leans heavily on Hitler's views and the Nazi and the fascist element, because they appealed to the mob back in the 30s. And Hitler was extremely anti-Masonic. His ideology, if you read his speeches and his writings, he was attacking two fundamental things. One was the Jews and the other were the Freemasons. He regarded them as the devil's agents. Now, I've seen no evidence of that in my researches into them, and I'm not a Freemason, as in, like, I haven't joined them ever. I know many that are. I've never yet met an evil person among them. They are the kind of people I've described. I think Hitler was wrong, and Hitler never had a degree. He never studied history. He wasn't an intellectual. He said, "Think with the blood." Well, no, you got to use the brain, mate. Poor old Hitler. So he started this anti-Masonic thing, which became an anti-Rosicrucian type thing, and then he created a sort of false black association, which Himmler ran, the kind of SS. And they pinched ideas from the Freemasons, created an initiatory order in a castle in Germany, where you were initiated into the SS and you had the runes carved into your jacket. But this was a parody of truth, a parody of goodness, and it was dividing humanity, very elitist, into the good Aryans and the bad everyone else. Now, the Rosicrucians are not racist. They've always, the wisdom came from the East, from Egypt, a largely black people, Syrian. They were open to Islam's input. They were an ecumenical universal movement within Europe. Leibniz studied Chinese thought. And genuine Freemasons and Rosicrucians are universalist. Their opponents are always racists, and they always have an ideology which is, ours is the only one or the best one. And I see that in Putin, I see it in Netanyahu, I see it in Trump, and Boris Johnson. Brexit, Britain's the best, we're the best. Totally against all that these people genuinely should stand for. So, yes, it's a big subject, but thank you for raising it. Okay. Let's finish with the gods. I think we can't solve all the problems in one session, much as I'd love to. We have to give some work to the gods to do, right?
Yes, we need them.
We need them, yes. Let's see who shows up. Yes. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Yes, more. I think I'm with Bacon on that. A little more learning is needed here, and then we will get back to the authentic divine.
I would be surprised, as politics is concerned, the position of the Jesuits, because I guess they are always in between.
I can tell you a funny story about the Jesuits if you're interested.
Please.
So one of my closest friends lives in the Jesuit college in Oxford University, and I've been in touch with the Jesuit community there. And I was doing a lot of research on Ignatius Loyola, who, fascinating man, right? And I discovered that his original inspiration for creating the Jesuits was to evangelize the Middle East, and particularly the Muslims, and turn them all into good Christians. That's what his big idea was. Because he was Spanish, that's what they'd been doing for centuries. Like the Reconquista, take it to the Middle East. And he actually went to Jerusalem on a boat, and he studied and learned. But some Franciscans in Jerusalem said, I don't think you'll succeed here. We've been trying for centuries. There's no way. Go back to Europe and just do your thing there. So he went back. Now, my question I put to my Jesuit friends in Oxford is, had Ignatius Loyola ever read the Quran? Because I'm doing the commentary on the Quran, right? And if so, which translation did they use? He didn't read Arabic, so he must have had a translation. What did he think of the Quran? And when did the first Jesuits ever comment on the Quran as a scholar? Because they're supposed to be such great scholars. And I thought we should have a conference on this theme in Oxford about the early Jesuit knowledge about the Quran, whether it existed. Has there ever been a commentary on the Quran by a Jesuit scholar, ever? I don't know of one.
Yeah.
I just thought it'd be a really interesting conference for an academic, because if that was the key reason he set up the Jesuits, you'd have thought he would have wanted to read the Quran and study it and do, But I don't know that. I've never seen any Jesuits discussing this matter. And I just thought, so let's just say I'm working on it. I'm hoping to run a conference eventually on this. When my commentary is put into book form, I'm going to add the footnotes, and I can add this point.
I can give you a testimony. When I went in Africa, that was on the Jesuit place.
Yes.
And one of the guy was made Arabic studies to go in the.
He was going to evangelize. In
yes.
Africa. Yeah.
And once he made all the studies, the hierarchy told him, "You won't go there. You go to Black Africa in Ivory Coast."
So they didn't want him to go and work with the Muslims?
No.
Why not?
That's the mystery. But as they call themselves, they are like soldiers, so
they have to obey.
They obey, and that's it.
Yeah.
But still, he could make these studies, and it was his vocation at the beginning.
Are you still in touch with that chap?
He's dead.
I'll see them in the Heavenly Library, but I'd like to talk to a living Jesuit who's an expert in Arabic and the Quran.
I'm sure there are.
Anyway, I'll give you to track them down. That's your job. Okay, what have we got? What have you got?
Queen of Aeon.
Oh, Eon again. We love Eon. Right.
We already have it very...
no, it's fine. He's turned up again. That's very appropriate. Okay, I've got Sin, the Six of Fire, who is a really interesting deity. I love this card. It's beautifully done. It shows... And he's associated with Haran in the north of Mesopotamia. It's a sacred place. And it's thought that it's where the original Abraham came from. It was dedicated to Sin, who was the moon god. So you got a moon showing the full and the waxing and the waning moons. And the moon god was the god of Haran. Now, I basically, in my commentary here, go into this in great detail. Because if it's true that Abraham was brought up, well, it is true, in a city that worshipped the moon god, Sin, would that not then reflect on his later influence in history? One would have thought so, yes. And the fact is that, the traditional narrative of Abraham, whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Christian, is that Abraham rejected polytheism. He rejected the manyness of the gods. He said there's only one God. What if the God he said there's only one of is the moon god? This is what I speculate. Nobody's ever thought of this or argued this. They all assume he meant the invisible God of Judaism, which you can't see, taste, touch, or feel. It's just like a concept. But what if Abraham, wasn't like a Jewish profound theologian like Maimonides, but just a normal guy from Haran? And what if he said, no, the moon is the supreme one? Why did they worship the moon? Because the moon is number. We talked earlier about number and Pythagoras. Because the moon changes shape and position in the sky. And it led to the invention of mathematics, it's thought, 30,000 BC, because people were tracking the moon. And the first signs, markings that prehistoric man made were to track the moon. And women loved the moon because it was connected with their cycles of fertility, so they wanted to track it. So the priestesses loved the moon. It was beautiful because it gives light but doesn't burn you up like the sun, which is too much. The moon is when you can go about in those desert regions in the Middle East. It's a friend to everyone. And in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, the moon is still sacred. Easter is set by the moon in the Christian faith. And in Islam, the moon is the most important symbol. It's on all the flags, it's above every mosque. And their months are taken from the moon. They have to see a sighting of the moon for it to be a new month. Essentially, they're worshipping sin. This is my argument, which I explain here. And I go into great detail on this. The same in Judaism. And what I discovered by tracing Yahweh's origin to Thoth and realizing he's the same as Khonsu, or Yah, the moon god. What if Moses had this sudden epiphany, realizing that the God of Abraham, his ancestor, worshipped the moon, and so did the Egyptians, worshipping Khonsu, the moon god Yah. So this is why he was able to say, yes, there is really only one God, and it's the moon god. So that's what I speculate, and there's a lot of historical stuff. I think what the card teaches us is, don't worry, this too will pass. Because the moon's always changing, and you think things have got so bad they can never improve, but then it comes back round, and it's full moon again, and everyone's happy. So I know the planet's going through some real troubles, but if only we, get people to study the gods more and be more faithful and more pious to all the faiths, instead of just to their own tradition, then we can get through this. If we can. That's how we get them off the mountain, because everyone's got their own mountain. The Taoists have their own mountains. The Druids, we have Cadair Idris, which I've been up the top of. And it's said that if you go up there, you come down either as a poet or mad. I think I came down as a poet. So let's get everybody working on that common wisdom. And that is symbolised by the moon, which symbolises the phases of life, and that's the beauty of life. It's the other thing that's worth saying, and Abraham and Moses didn't know this, is that the moon is essential to the evolution of life. The Darwinian approach to, the evolution of cells. We have the moon within us because our life cycles are dependent on the moon's phases, and they now think that life began on this planet because we have a moon. If we hadn't a moon, maybe life wouldn't have started on this planet. So, like exoplanetary biologists are now working on which planets have moons and is that constant for all life planets? They think they've discovered a planet which has probably got life on it, a few, light years away from here. And that's going to, I'm looking forward to coming back in a few hundred years and seeing how far we've got with that one. Like a Rosicrucian, I think we'll meet every 400 years. But I think we're in for an exciting ride as we discover the wisdom in the universe. And there you can see Abraham looking up at the starry sky. And it's, yes, I love the moon. And of course, modern Druids, we understand the moon, and we work with the moon's phases at Stonehenge and Avebury, they were giant temples for the sun and the moon. They're both sacred. Yes, okay, and then we've got this card, as if to finish this kind of astronomical time thing, the Queen of Air, who is a Eon, and Eon comes up in our cards. We like Eon because he's a very occult and underrated god, and Jung, the great commentator on alchemy, took him seriously enough to write a whole book about him. Jung was a fascinating chap. I wish I'd met him. I knew people that knew him, but I never met him personally. But he inspired me through these other people to look at the deeper symbology behind events, to keep track of synchronicities, and to see all existence as a patterning from divine causality. And I don't know if I've shared this before, but I'll just share the Eon perspective of things is quite broad, big picture stuff. He's interested in all time and the phases that we're going through. So time is, it looks like the planet's really going through difficult times. But I think Eon again is bringing positivity. We will get through this if we have enough people doing this kind of work and focusing our collective intelligence. I've tried to put in my books tools that people can work with, and I think if we get on with the work, we will get through these crises. I'd love to translate my work into Russian, and I'm very happy to go and lecture in Moscow if Putin won't arrest me and have me killed off. I'd even debate publicly with him and his cronies because. Russia is also part of this project. It's part of the European family of nations. When I was in Moscow, I was elected coordinator of Philosophers of Peace. I'd be happy if Putin wants to call through the philosophers in Moscow University a conference on the philosophy of peace, and it's long overdue. I'm happy to go and chair it, or give some talks. And the conference just took place in Rome, the World Congress of Philosophy. I don't know if any Russians were there, but. I think we have a duty as intellectuals to engage in debate and discussion and dialectic. And Eon would agree, because Eon symbolises humanity really. We're surrounded by this recurring kind of wheel of circumstance, the zodiac. And we've got this snake going up our body, which represents the kind of energies that we have as physical beings. But it leads ultimately towards enlightenment. We're on a path to enlightenment. And that's when you find your higher self. And that's why Jung called his book, Eon, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self. Fascinating stuff, because Hegel had talked about the phenomenology of spirit, but in a kind of abstract way. What Jung was trying to do is saying, okay, but how does that manifest in people, individuals, your dreams, your feelings, your emotion, your psychological troubles? And that is the real question. What is the self? And how do we... So really, it's similar to the self. Jung said there's a mandala. Whenever a mandala appears, then the self is being drawn. Because we are everything. We are the dark and the light, the up and the down, the left and the right, the male and the female. And that's what Eon stands for. He was a classical Hellenistic god, worshipped in both Greece and Rome, mostly by the intellectuals. He wasn't a sort of god with lots of temples like Zeus and Apollo and stuff. He was a philosopher's god. He was worshipped later by the Gnostics like Valentinus, who saw that existence comprises these dialectical opposites. He called siges, which come in pairs like male and female, immovable or mixture, or love, and so on. And they blend. So we're the product of God's alchemy, effectively, according to Eon, and the goddess's alchemy. So what does this card mean? Well, we have to find our true selves. So the problems on the planet are that people have misidentified with a part of the narrative. You know, I really pity people like Putin. He probably had some good moments, but he's really identified with the heroic Russian narrative. You know, we're going to fight World War II all over again, and we're calling those people Nazis because we won last time, let's do it again. He's like in the wrong movie. If it was a Hollywood plot, you tell him to get off the stage. And I really feel sad because he's identified with that. Instead of jumping forward to the real visionary, the Enlightenment narrative, which Russia has the potential to do, and I know because I've been there, I love Russia. You know, the true Russian soul. By the way, there were lots of Rosicrucians in 18th century Russia. And when I was librarian at Rudolf Steiner House, Rudolf Steiner was a Rosicrucian as well. You know, there were people who'd written about the Rosicrucian tradition in Russian Freemasonry, which was very important and made modern Russia. Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. These were esoteric people who wanted to join in that project of advancing humanity. The trouble is the Bolsheviks didn't understand any of that. They were ignorant. Stalin was an uncouth, barbarous thug, and all the people he worked with, and they destroyed. Lenin was vaguely intellectual, but not properly. He didn't understand all this esoteric stuff. He just thought it was nonsense and he wanted to crush it. Very sad. And so Russia has to allow that esoteric wisdom to come out of, you know, hiding. It's hiding in cellars now. It has to come out and reclaim the streets because that's the true Russia. And to do it really sneakily, like Christ said, be as wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. You know, so let's put that on the flag of the new Russia. Let's have the serpent of Eon and the dove, you know, on the Russian flag. So yes, so it's really exciting, Eon. He's very attractive. He represents beauty, and he's the consort of air. So he's got that feminine, masculine side balanced. And he's the antidote to Sophia-phobia, the fear of wisdom. Eon is saying, no, love wisdom, because it's everything. You know, it's what we are.
Yeah, it's quite surprising to see a god spelled as a queen of air.
Well, the tarot has kings and queens,
Uh-huh.
and so because they're all male deities, I've chosen the most feminine of that branch. So air, you know, Eon is an air god, and he was accepted as having female aspect to him. So I'm not, you know, it's a tarot of the gods.
Yeah.
And some men have very female qualities.
Yes, that's interesting. That's
you know, he would be
balance.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're having parties in. If they're not, they ought to have parties in Hollywood where they dress up as the different gods. It would be fun. Yes, there's a wonderful Netflix movie on at the moment called Chaos. Some Hollywood filmmakers have created this thing, which is the Greek gods coming back to life. It's set in contemporary, you know, world, well, maybe a bit in the future, and it's starring Zeus and Prometheus and Hera and all these gods. It's creatively done. It's on right now, you know, so it could have been better. I would give it like a C+. I think it's quite blasphemous if you take these gods seriously. It's quite rude about them. It makes them out to be real fascist, evil type. Zeus is a really horrible guy. But I'm not going to grumble and complain. But I do think it was done. Yeah, I think they could have been nicer to the gods. They could have done it more imaginatively and creatively. It's typical, like lots of horror, killing, blood. The gods are sort of fascist killers. You know, that's not how I see the gods. Certainly not Eon, but also not Zeus. I mean, he's also in this tarot of the gods. So I think it's a sort of